Hey everyone, welcome back to the Overseers. My name's Proilios and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing. We are officially done with the Overwatch League's regular season uh, for 2021 and it's been a wild ride so far. And we've got a couple of um, regular season kind of highlights to go over in this episode. So we'll just kick things off with those. But remember, we will be adding sections to this video so you guys can skip to whichever sections you want to listen to us talk about so that, you can fit in like the best content for you within the time frame you have. All right. So, Nightwing, Uh, how do you feel about the season coming to sort of an end, at least the regular season matches?
Yeah, I think it was one heck of a season, honestly. I think quite different from the previous season, even though both this seasons kind of saw, uh, the kind of the same format of online play, divided regions. But I think they did have kind of a different feel to it, where I think last season was a bit down in the dumps in the beginning, at least the first half of the season, when everyone was kind of getting adjusted to this new environment. And this season, I think players are kind of getting more used to it, and they've put on performances that have been quite interesting to watch, really. So it's been a real fun season to watch so far, and obviously we've got the play-ins for the countdown. Playoffs for the countdown cup, and then the play-ins for the actual grand finals as well. So lots of interesting things still coming up for Overwatch League in 2021, but so far I think it has been interesting. Uh, what was kind of especially noteworthy is that this season did kind of feel a bit short, didn't it? Because every team had only about 4 matches to play in a month, and then a few tournament matches after that. And so teams haven't really shown us maybe all of their flavors, or even all of their players for some of the teams, just because of how kind of short the season is. And so every game really mattered all that much for that regular season record. And that's why teams did kind of stick to their ways to some extent, and just try to find kind of the perfect formula instead of experimenting and finding things that may in reality be better than what they executed with. So those are my thoughts on how the season has gone. What do you think, Produce?
Yeah, I do agree. I think this season has been really fun to watch, and that's primarily because I think we saw a more competitive uh, side to each team because almost all teams upgraded their rosters for this season, and I think that's been possible mainly because they've like I think because of COVID, knowing that they don't have to be traveling a lot and instead have their own bases, they have been able to kind of save some money, like additional money for the player salaries, and maybe that's why they've been able to get such good players for the most part. And for that reason, we've seen a very like how do you say that? Like the teams at the top have always been in flux. It's not been the same teams all throughout the season. So, for instance, we saw like the Dallas Fuel and the Shanghai Dragons kind of being the strongest teams uh, right from the beginning, going to Hawaii every single tournament. But now we've seen that neither of these teams is actually in the playoffs of the Countdown Cup. So there has been a power shift as the season kind of progressed, primarily because the meta has been uh, like there's been such a big variety in the meta because you've seen within each meta based on the map you've seen a lot of different heroes come out, and it's primarily been the teams that are able to like play the meta picks as well as flex onto some niche heroes based on the map, and these are the teams that are usually on the top. So I feel like I definitely would have enjoyed the season better if it was stretched out over maybe a couple more months because sometimes it did feel like they were cramming too many matches into like a single day of play. So, for instance, we had certain Saturdays and Sundays where there would be three APAC matches and three NA matches on a single day, and that's not very easy to keep up with. And like considering that the season could have been longer, I wish that they would have moved some of these games to like a few weeks ahead and then spread out the season that way. But either way, I was still very happy to watch all of these games play out. And yeah, there's more to discuss right now, so we'll just get into it, I guess. Um, so the first thing we wanted to mention was that the London Spitfire get their only win of the season against the Vancouver Titans as of week 18. So congratulations to them. Uh, it did feel like they weren't going to get that final win, especially because the Titans were looking like the better team. But what do you think went right for them in that match, Nightwing?
I think a lot of it was just kind of off the back of London kind of finally waking up to the potential that Shax has. I think that man really did just put up an insane carry performance, and the fact that Sparker, after now having been on the team for half a season, is also able to coordinate well with Shax and the rest of the team. And so that DPS lineup, I think, really was kind of the uh, kind of just like patty in the burger that made the meal also tasty. I mean, uh, Shax put up just an insane performance on the Tracer. Obviously, London as a team as a whole, not as insane, but just as a solo player, I think we've all known ever since last season and potentially even before that, that he is a player that can put the game on his back, and I think that's honestly kind of most of the reason why London succeeded. I think Vancouver were not able to find that same kind of carry performance from their DPS. uh, I do believe the support lines as well as the tank lines for both teams are still struggling, despite British Hurricanes' dominant performance before they entered the Overwatch League. So I think a lot of it just has to do with that DPS line, in my opinion. But great to see that the Valiant are the only team left who did not actually win a single match. And London were able to get some sort of redemption, I suppose, for what was a grueling and quite painful season for them.
Yep. And like you mentioned, the Valiant did go winless in this season, and I guess it's kind of how you say karma coming back to bite this team. Uh, like the management did a pretty crappy move by letting go of all of the players they had signed, like before the season began. Since well, you guys know what happened. If you don't, you can check out our LA Valiant team review. But essentially the roster decided to move the team decided to move to China and just dumpstered the whole roster and signed some Chinese players who played at minimum wage. And I do feel bad for the players like themselves because they did definitely put their heart and soul into trying to win these games. But ultimately, there's just no comparison for quality, and no matter uh, like what kind of players you sign, you need to give them some time to develop their skills, and also I guess pay them a lot better in order to incentivize them to uh, push for a better position in the league standings. So yeah, I mean, do you kind of sympathize with these players, Nightwing, because they did kind of seem to put a lot of effort into it.
I think I do sympathize with some of the players. Obviously, one of the people signed as a player I have absolutely no sympathy for, which is NVN,
Like,
who is just kind of racking the big bucks while doing absolutely nothing. I think the Valiant players were kind of given this impossible situation where they didn't really have the talent as a team to be able to get a win, but and many players that were offered to get signed to the Valiant for this very reason kind of declined that the contract, even though it meant that they had to play in contenders for a significantly lower salary, despite Valiant most likely only paying these current players the league minimum salary. And so these players really, they just have to kind of make ends meet, right? They have been trying to become professional gamers and make it a sustainable kind of life choice for them. So I definitely don't blame them for trying. It's just that the management has been absolutely atrocious, and I really do pity players that have to kind of work under that. And that said, I definitely don't think the players that were signed have incredible amounts of talent. Uh, Obviously, Weah was signed to an Overwatch League team before, but even then, it's not like he made basically any impact onto that particular team. I believe it was the LA Gladiators, right?
Guya was on the Guangzhou charge, but then
Oh yeah, the
yeah, you're
Guangzhou
right.
Charge.
There was Shu on that team back then, so I think that's where you got the
Yeah,
Gladiators from.
yeah. Anyway, uh, the rest of the team, I don't really uh, know what to think of. I think Silver 3 had exceptionally poor performances. I don't really think that the tank line was anything to write home about. I think Molandran looked good on one match on Hanzo, maybe. Uh, Crystal looked, I mean, all right for being Crystal, but it's not really something to be particularly proud of, I think, if you're an LA Valiant fan, just because there were no real results presented. And it, it was a good day for the Valiant, the day that they would clinch a single map off of a match. So I just hope that there is some kind of repercussion, or at least some sort of change that is brought about in the Overwatch League rulebook, or just the kind of management, because currently it's just quite disheartening to see that teams are just allowed to kind of dump in whatever roster they think uh, will kind of make their business the most profitable by paying the players the least minimum salary, and then just uh, making the league very unfun to watch, honestly, because I can still get behind teams like the London Spitfire, who, honestly, I think, despite their very tough record, I can still understand why those players were signed. They did genuinely show promise. But with the LA Valiant, I think it's quite inexcusable, honestly, that players that are have been picked up quite randomly, and no decent kind of backup players have been signed. It's just one quote unquote player coach who doesn't really seem to be doing anything that's getting signed to fill the league minimum requirement. I think it's quite atrocious that such a thing is allowed to happen. So I really hope that we do not see a repeat of the situation next year. But considering how the Overwatch League's kind of sponsorship system will uh, kind of seems to tend to go currently, because of whatever issues have been brought to light, as well as the current lawsuit issues against both Activision Blizzard, uh, as well as the Overwatch League having issues with player unions not being formed properly. I believe to set that salary cap, there's just a lot of issues that I don't that I think will lead to more of these freak situations happening in the Overwatch League, which I think is very very unfortunate, and I hope that they are resolved soon, because I do genuinely hope that we get to see a very competitive league more than it was this season, because yes, regions, especially regions like NA, were extremely competitive at the high end, but then there were these basically just fodder tier garbage teams that uh, I think is just a shame that they were allowed to be created at all.
Yeah, completely agree with the sentiment there. I mean, as Overwatch League fans, we do believe that all the necessary steps are taken in order to maintain the competitive integrity of the esport, and also to protect the players that have worked so hard to reach this level. So yeah, I do hope no one is allowed to do what the Immortals did to the initial Valiant roster for season 4. And yeah, let's see if the league's able to do something about it. But anyway, just on a side note, before we get on to our next topic, some of the old exclusive Overwatch League skins are available for purchase from the game client for a limited time. So you can find Jonax MVP Zen skin. Then you can find Flying Ace, which is the London Spitfires Championship Winston skin. You can find Goat Brigitte, and you can find the Thunder Doomfist, which was the Shocks Championship skin. And yeah, um, on to our next topic, which is quite an exciting one, is the Overwatch League MVP voting, which has started as of this week, and there are 10 players that have been selected for candidacy, and those are Fearless, Prophet, Anbin, Izayaki, Lip, Leaf, Pelican, Shu, Fleda, and Sparkle. And I think it's important for us to answer the question, who do we think deserves this MVP title? And I'm going to ask you first, Nightwing. Who's your favorite?
Okay, so throughout the course of the season, especially the first half, uh, the dominant kind of idea that was floating around was that Fearless should be the MVP because he was putting up these insane carry performances on that Winston, even though the rest of Dallas also looked quite solid. But I think in the second half of the season, you've seen that he has sometimes really not been as impactful as he was in that first half. And in the second half, you do see that his ball play, or I guess the lack thereof, is kind of the bane of the Dallas Fuel, where teams like Shanghai are able to use that comp to its almost maximum potential at times, where Dallas simply do not have that same avenue available to them because Fearless's ball is just not that good. And I think that's something that, at least to me, makes it hard for me to really put him in that top MVP conversation kind of position. And so, who I am considering going with, though I haven't particularly finalized it yet, is probably going to be someone between Leave, Sparkle, or Pelican. I think Pelican has almost unequivocally uh, clinched that Rookie of the Year spot. I don't think anyone really is too close to him. The closest person maybe being Skewed or Shy, but even those players have had kind of their off moments. I think Skewed has looked good, but he's not really in that kind of. I guess just he's playing the wrong position to stand out a lot, but he does look like potentially the best brig in the league, right? And Shy has looked good at quite a different kind of situations. But Pelican, I think, while he definitely is probably the rookie of the year, I think he can actually make a good case for most valuable player because while Atlanta do have kind of changed their entire like VOD review system as far as I've heard, and they're doing a lot more player led VOD review as well as just a lot more emphasis on what the players know and what the players want to learn. And I think that has made a significant difference in how well the Atlanta Rain have performed. They've turned in from a kind of gatekeeper team from last year to a real heavy hitter this season. And I think Pelican does have a lot of credit in that. The other DPS for the Atlanta Rain and every other player as well has been looking very good. Players like Iris looked massively improved, but I think Pelican really is that X factor, similar to another player for a different team, which is Sparkle. I think Sparkle and Pelican, who I think both kind of deserve that MVP spot, uh, both have kind of the same conversation about them where the rest of the team looks solid, but this player is just that X factor that can swap to other heroes quite comfortably and just kind of wipe the floor with the enemy team. So it's Pelican and Sparkle who are in that MVP conversation. And while Chengdu has not been doing that great, uh, I think their very clear carry player, who I think is their MVP and is actually the front runner for my particular just MVP choice is going to be Leave from the Chengdu Hunters. I think this man is just absolutely cracked, and he has been just putting his team on his back time and time again. Where I think Chengdu, uh, while they have added some good pieces, I think Gaga is a very stable and good kind of addition on that main tank role, where Amang does not have to just force the ball all the time. I think there is still some contention on the Chengdu Hunters within the coaches' minds as to who to really field on that role. But Leave just has to be in. I mean, the man is just a nutcase on the Tracer, on Hitscan, on the Doomfist, even at times. He's just, I think, like there is no way that he is not the best player on the Chengdu Hunters. So those are probably my picks for the Overwatch League 2021 MVP.
Yeah, and I think those are really good choices because even I was trying to kind of decide between Leave and Sparkle. I do believe Pelican has been exceptional this season. I keep raving about how good his Echo is, but I think to some extent, Pelican's able to kind of operate that well because the rest of his team has really figured out their whole synergy. I think they've just grown into such a stable roster that all of them kind of instinctively know what to do because they pretty much just play one composition more than 90% of the time, and that is the anti dive bunker. They do eventually play the anti dive brawl with Reinhardt in instead of Orisa, but it's primarily the like Gators Orisa that helps them out. And I think because like this team has such a stable structure, it makes it way easier for somebody like Pelican who's just really so flexible to operate. And I'm in no way saying that he's not impressive, but I feel like Leaf and Sparkle have probably had um, like a larger impact on how their teams have played this season. I think I'll talk about Lee first. Like you said, he's just a mechanical god. He's just a hyper aggressive DPS player and has been carrying games just because he's kind of his raw mechanical skill is always better than his opponents, and that makes him a really fearsome player to play against. And on the other hand, you have Sparkle, who's actually someone I'm leaning a little bit more towards because although he's not like that, he's not always a carry level player like Leaf. He does have that kind of explosive potential. And I think he's had some really surprising flexes this season, especially on the Tracer, like who we didn't think the Dynasty was ready to play at all. But after XZ kind of stepped out, uh, Sparkle came in and he just kind of turned into this. Uh, how do you say it? Kind of, he looked like a really well trained tracer, is what I would say, because he didn't have that natural ability. He doesn't move or make decisions like I would say like a more polished natural racer player would make. You can tell the difference, but he's always ready to take on duels with the enemy tracer, just deny space to them because he knows that like he might not be able to beat them in the 1v1, but he can buy time for his team to kind of make plays. But he still sometimes started winning duels, after which he started completely wrecking backlines. His tracking was phenomenal. And I think that tracking kind of also transferred over to the soldier, which he played in some niche compositions during the Summer Showdown and the Countdown Cup. And it was like a really good showing from him. And not only that, but he's also been a really fantastic Genji and Doomfist player whenever his team has needed those heroes. Considering how they didn't have a hit scan at all, like just playing Sparkle and Doha on their signature heroes and trying to make the most out of it worked really well for the Dallas Fuel. And I think Sparkle's explosive potential uh, contributed way more than what Doha did, although Doha didn't play badly himself. But yeah, you see all of his performances on Hitscan as well as Projectile. And you also see how he became such a smart Symmetra player as well during the Summer Showdown. It was just super impressive to me that he just didn't he isn't an MVP because of his raw mechanics, but because of his partly his mechanics, partly his flexibility, and partly I think his decision making and presence of mind in game. So I think he's like the right combination of brawn and brains, and that's why I think he will probably be getting my vote for the MVP candidacy. Maybe leave if I change my mind last minute, but I'm favoring Sparkle at the moment. Um, and yeah, should we move on to the Countdown Cup team breakdowns, Nightwing?
Yeah, I do want to mention that I think over the years there has been kind of a shift in who really should be the MVP, because like we have mentioned, Sparkle is kind of in that conversation because he's in that kind of hyper flex category where he just picks up many heroes and he's excellent at all of them. Whereas I think the first 2 years you saw that uh, players who did succeed mostly on just one singular role, just because the balance of the game was just that kind of tilted on its side, that just excelling on that one single hero could kind of get you recognition for most of your kind of just MVP contention, right? But over time, as we saw with Fleta, and then later now players like Sparkle or Pelican or even Leave, um, we're seeing that that flexibility, especially on that DPS role, really does just make a world of difference, and that is really what makes you a very very important player for your team, where you're always there to support your team on whatever kind of role or type of positioning or aggressiveness or defensiveness that your team requires. So uh, that's just something I'd like to mention. It's an interesting thing to note how that perception of what a valuable player really is has kind of changed over the years. So with that, yeah, we can move on to the next topic.
All right. So as we do for each tournament, we are just going to be going over the four teams that have qualified for the Countdown Cup playoffs, and those are from the APAC region, the Seoul Dynasty and the Chengdu Hunters, and from the NA region, the Atlanta Reign and the LA Gladiators. So I think let's go over the APAC region first. And before we actually like break down these teams, I think it's worth mentioning that the Shanghai Dragons, for the first time this season, have not qualified for a set of tournament playoffs, and that's pretty interesting, don't you think, Lightwin?
Yeah, I think it is quite interesting. Uh, though I think some of the reasons why were very apparent during the matches that they played, just because they were subbing people in and out willy nilly. They were trying to get some value out of the signings they'd made, despite not really playing them beforehand. Shanghai are obviously the first seed in the entire Overwatch League, as well as obviously the first seed for the actual playoffs for this season, just because of their insane league points based of their previous performances in this season. So they did kind of just experiment a little bit, but even then, I think it's a little bit inexcusable the way that their level of gameplay just kind of dropped by, I think, quite a large margin at times um, during these particular qualifiers. What do you think?
Yeah, it was an absolute shocker to me how the Shanghai Dragons kind of it seemed like they sandbagged, at least in their first game against the Philadelphia Fusion, which was not a bad team by any means. But I mean, to sub out Fleta and put in Develop and who are you just to test out the waters seemed like a stretch when you knew that there was still one tournament that you could go out and win. And I don't know if they were just overconfident or whether they legitimately thought subbing players out and kind of maybe I don't know if they were thinking of preventing burnout for Fleta, but it's really odd to me that they would think of doing that when they've got such a good groove going on for this season, knowing that only two teams from the APAC region actually qualify for the final play-ins. So it's quite like for the final playoffs, my bad. But yeah, in this meta, especially the Shanghai Dragons look way less consistent than they normally do. And even though the quality of play wasn't inherently bad, it was just far below the quality of some of these other teams, especially like the Fusion, the Hunters, and the Dynasty, who kind of seized some really good wins and put up some great performances. So yeah, kind of sucks for them, but I can understand what happened, and they probably will not repeat that mistake again.
I
But yeah,
mean,
sure. Yeah. Well,
Uh, to be fair to the Shanghai Dragons, this is really the only opportunity that they had to test out these new players in an official game. Because after this, every game matters for the Shanghai Dragons. These games, honestly, in the grand scheme of the season, don't really matter. Uh, Obviously, there are some winnings to be had because of the Countdown Cup, but in terms of the entire season, I think it's sort of fine to, I guess, try out players here. You did see something very similar come out of the Hangzhou Spark, where they did play Coldest and Mika finally after people clamoring about them for what felt like ages. Liga is still on that just side of the milk carton where he's just like a missing kid, uh, where you have to like call a like an FBI number if you spot him. Uh, he's been turned into a two-way player and is not really has not seen any play time at all. So unfortunate for that. But yeah, so the Hangzhou Spark, as well as the Shanghai Dragons, both of these teams did go for just testing out these players at the very end of the season, because while it's fine to do that here, uh, when it comes to the playoffs, I think uh, the consequences are a lot more grave. So I can kind of understand why they did this.
yeah, I can understand what you mean. I think if the season were a little longer, they could have had more of a chance to experiment. But unfortunately, because of the whole 16 game limit for each team, excluding the play-ins and playoffs, of course, it made it really hard for some of these teams to bust out some niche players. Like, for example, we barely saw Tayo playing from the SF Shock, and we didn't see Liga at all. So it just it feels sad. Like I feel sad that some of these players don't get to be fielded and show off their skills. But yeah, there's not much you can do anyway. Let's then start talking about the Seoul Dynasty, which is the first team to qualify from the APAC region for the Countdown Cup. I think I'll start things off here just by mentioning some of the players that I feel have uh, been kind of highlights in this meta for me. And primarily, that is the DPS line of Profit and Fitz. I think these two players have been really well coordinated, have been really mechanically strong, and very disciplined in their approach. I think the whole of Seoul Dynasty is a team that is quite disciplined and conservative in terms of their positioning, and you can see that with even Profit and Fitz. Like, I think Profit especially got to play a lot of Tracer in this meta, and as usual, played incredibly clean as he normally does. And he's just been popping off this tournament. He may not always be flashy, but always seems to know what to do, and is just a high impact player overall. And on the other side, you have Fitz, who has shown a lot of his flexibility in this meta because he's been able to play heroes like Sombra, McCree, Hanzo. Although on Hanzo, he's not been as good as he was last season. I think his Sombra has been especially great because he maintains a lot of communication with his team. He's really smart with his hacks, and again has a very conservative playstyle. He doesn't really go for those risky plays where sometimes you'll see a Sombra just popping up behind an enemy Brig or an enemy McCree going for an EMP, then get stunned and just wastes an ultimate essentially. And you never see Fitz do that. He'll wait out those cooldowns or he'll maintain distance and hack any threats before he goes for an EMP. So he's a really smart Sombra player. And I think his McCree has also been amazing because he's always taking like really good angles, poking down targets, still like maintaining a safe position. Because, generally speaking, as McCree, sorry, I'm going a bit deeper, you don't want to take long flanks. You want to take these really short off angles, just get some damage in. And if you're challenged or you feel threatened at any point, you just back up and come back to your tanks. And that's something Fitz does quite diligently. I think a special shout out to you because even though I thought he was kind of a feeder towards the beginning of the season, he has also started positioning a lot better. I think his diva play has been quite smart. He's been really aware of his surroundings and has been eating those pulse bombs, sometimes blizzards every now and then. And even his Zarya play has not been bad because on any of the off tanks he plays, I've noticed that he plays to enable his main tank and peel for his supports, which is like what a quintessential off tank should be doing. So he doesn't go for those hero plays and just plays like a really humble game, I would say. So yeah, I think these three are mainly going to be uh, like the core of what could make the dynasty successful in this countdown cup run. Although I do think it's going to be a tough ride for them. What are your thoughts, Nightwing?
I think you have summed up kind of the essence of the Seoul Dynasty at the moment, where many of their players kind of know their place in a way and they know what their role is. Not all of them need to perform these hero plays. The DPS line is there for that, especially Profit, and Gesture is there as well for that kind of just aggro play style, which Gesture is known quite a lot for, despite sometimes it coming up a little bit short, just because sometimes he just does throw kind of care to the wind and just do whatever. But that said, the rest of the Soul Dynasty, I think, is quite consistently just aware of what they should be doing. Tu is not the flashiest player. You could see that he was just not up to that mechanical mark, or just possess the same aggressiveness that Hotba did on the enemy team when it was a Zarya v Zarya matchup. And despite that, Seoul did actually manage to play quite well because they have this very good balance between being aggressive and defensive, kind of distributed between the different players of the team. So I think that's something that may actually prove to be quite useful to them, especially in just keeping their backline alive, which uh, you know helps them apply the Discord orbs at all times, because that is just an incredible tool that when you lose your Zen, you just lose instantly, right? So that's something that I think the Soul Dynasty can kind of iterate upon and still stand a chance in this tournament. But I think personally that the NA teams are a bit stronger, so Seoul will have to kind of work harder, I think, than uh, their counterparts on the other side of the ocean.
And do you also want to go over the Chengdu Hunters before we move on to the NA teams?
So
So
for the
I think,
Chengdu
yeah.
Hunters, I think it is kind of a boon to them that uh, the current patch kind of does favor them a little bit, because Jinmu can play that Pharah, which seems to be incredibly effective when played by the right players, uh, such as Nero on the SF Shock, or obviously Sparkle on the Dallas Fuel, despite neither of those players and teams making it to the actual tournament. So that's something that Jinmu can finally kind of abuse as the just a resident like silly hero player of the Overwatch League, where he can finally have some fun with that. The rest of the team, I think, is in a good position to still make a case for themselves, but I think probably I'd peg them as lower than like lower in chances of winning than the Soul Dynasty, and I'm already not too high on the Dynasty because I don't think that singular comp is really going to be enough to kind of clutch it out for the Chengdu Hunters. I think for the Tracer Sombra sort of comp, they are going to struggle. They can't really do anything with Jimmy or Taro Cookie, because those players are kind of rendered useless by the current patch and meta uh, for the vast majority of the time. And so with the roster that's being fielded, I think it is still going to be tough for the Chengdu Hunters to really get things done.
Yeah, fair enough. And I do think there are some bright spots. Like not only can Jinmu play a lot of that Farah, but I think over time he's also gotten a lot better at Sombra, just by virtue of grinding her in Overwatch League matches officially. And I think he's kind of developed a playstyle similar to Fitz's in the sense that he prefers going for those hack oriented plays rather than just kind of mechanically farming squishies or deleting them, which is something that actually Leave has been doing because for some reason the team has been preferring playing Leave on the Sombra in this meta. I'm guessing it's because they want Jinmo on the Pharah. Uh, so like Leaf's Tracer has been like a little bit scarce. But on the Sombra, we've seen him kind of leverage his mechanical prowess to assassinate squishies rather than going for those team oriented hacks so that he can also play a little bit independently of his tank line. And I think Leafs Hanzo has probably been the best in the league this season. Like he's the complete package. He's got insane accuracy. He gets picks very frequently. His sonic arrow usage is really smart, and he's one of the few players who consistently gets kills with Dragon Strike, which is like an ultimate that's generally just used for zoning purposes. Uh, so yeah, I think Leafs going to do a great job again. You've got Monk and Yveltal in the back line with just like solid decision making skills. Yveltal being a really good Mercy player, just pocketing Jinmu. And you've also got, I think, a pretty good tank line in Gaga and Latium, because like the kind of ball Zarya game that they're able to play is probably their best. Like that's ball Zarya is what Chengdu shown on last season as well, and Latium was still on that Zarya role. So the like I think the engagement timings are well synced, and especially considering that Ball and Zarya are the kind of their signature heroes in some ways. So it's really good. Like they both have a lot of mechanical skill and a lot of good communication, and I think that's what has also contributed to this team like reaching this level in the Countdown Cup. But yeah, like I do agree that they are still going to struggle against the NA teams, and yeah, we will talk about why that is as well. So, should we then travel across the ocean, like you said, Nightwing, and talk about uh, the Atlanta rain first?
All right, yeah, sure. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So the Atlanta Rain, I think, are coming in, at least for me, as the favorites for the Countdown Cup. I don't think anything remains to be said from my part because, like as I've said before, all their players are at the top of their respective games, and their cohesion is next level. They've like for a while they've known how to counter dive bombs of all kinds, like using some of their signature heroes, like especially Gators, Orisa, and Hawks Diva, and like in a way they're kind of doing what Chengdu was famous for, which is like just playing the comfort picks rather than adhering to the meta. So they just like no matter what the meta is, Atlanta just prefers playing anti-dive bunkers. Just play Orisa Diva, get the Tourbillon in there, get McCree, get back break, and just shred anybody that tries to flank or dive them. And sometimes they just sub out the Orisa for the Reinhardt, and still kind of they can play the same other five heroes because they still have to stick together and still work well together. So there is like one question mark, which is if Pelican will be playing in the Countdown of playoffs. Because if you, in case you guys didn't know, Pelican had to have an emergency surgery this week because of pneumothorax, which is a collapsed lung. So fortunately, the procedure went really well, and Pelican's recovering quite nicely. But like since he was still under like medical care, Edison had to fill for him, and even despite that, the team looked really good and qualified for the Countdown Cup. So props to them. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of whether or not Pelican gets to play because uh, Pelican did say he's kind of discharged from the hospital and can get back to playing Overwatch. But we'll see if his health like is good enough for him to play. And like fortunately, Kai and Edison can still play those double hit scan comps with Tracer and McCree. And Edison can still play top, which doesn't require a ton more skill. So, yeah, I think it's still going to work out for them really well. What are your thoughts, Nightwing?
I think Edison did impress quite a lot in Pelican's absence. And like you said, I think they will largely be fine. I think Atlanta Rain is probably holding a slight advantage over the other teams just because they are playing comps that I think other teams are not able to really play, or at least play to the same level that the Atlanta Rain does. In the NA region, it was talked about how the Rhine comps were only really being played between scrims between the SF Shock and the Atlanta Rain, and no other team was really challenging them properly on that comp, right? So that is something that they have in their back pocket, and that is a comp that has given them reasonable success. Their anti dive is incredibly refined, I think. Uh, just because Orisa and Diva are comfortable roles for the uh, tanks for the Atlanta Rain. Hawk has been just this crazy hungry hippo where he's just been eating ults left and right. So I think the Atlanta Rain are still in a good position to take it. Though I think the last remaining team that we have that has qualified for the Countdown Cup, the LA Gladiators, do stand a chance, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And just like I think moving on to the LA Gladiators, I think like although the LA Gladiators haven't been exactly the most flashy team, they still have some really good pieces, and I have especially been impressed with their tank line this time round. Looking through the replay viewer at some of their footage, I think Muse's Orisa play has been pretty solid as of late. Like I think he does a good job at taking up really good power positions and like applies a ton of pressure to enemy tanks, which is kind of what an Orisa is supposed to do. He doesn't necessarily land those fat halt combos, but I think that's mainly because of like the play style of that team rather than his inability to do so. And especially when you're playing against some of these dive compositions, it's hard to like clump up a lot of enemies with halt. And also, I think Space has been supplementing Muse really well. He's been playing a fantastic diva all throughout the season and has a very balanced play style. He's always seems to be doing the right thing at the right time, just solid decision making skills and awareness. And I think they've also got a big advantage with Skewed, who is still the best brig in the league, in my opinion. He plays very well around his team and takes up like really safe positions. And I think having a brig specialist has really benefited the Gladiators because there's no other team that has got a brig specialist at all. Like Washington tried doing it with Tuba, but they weren't able to get nearly as close to as Q does. So yeah, I do think the Gladiators are still competitive. They do also have Kevster, who's just been popping off on the tracer, and Birdring, who has been like good every now and then, although Sombra still needs some work. So I think this team should still be fine and be able to beat at least the APAC teams. The rain will still prove to be a challenge, in my opinion, for them. But yeah, we'll see. Any further points from your end, Nightwing?
I think on a player by player basis, the Gladiators definitely do stand quite a decent chance because, like you said, Space is incredibly consistent and he knows exactly what to do at the right time. Shu has sort of been released from BAP jail and he is playing that Ana to an exceptional level, like he always has. And he has also been put on that Zen at times, and he's looking great on that as well. Uh, I think he may potentially be, and actually likely be, the best flex support out of all of the qualifying teams in the Countdown Cup. Kevster, I think, has been honestly insane. I think it's between him or Leave to be the best tracer in this particular tournament. And I think he really has been that X factor for the team. I think Birdring has had a relatively quiet season, and we have kind of poked fun at his Sombra play quite often. But in this particular meta, I think it actually looks quite fine, and he has been looking quite decent on that role. I think it's not the same aggressive, damage focused kind of Sombra role that players like Lip go for, but he has been setting them up quite well so far, and I think he might finally have adjusted into that role a little better. Muse has been looking good on the Orisa and the ball. I don't think they can really match Atlanta on that Rhine comp at all. I don't think Muse has looked good on the Rhine basically at all this season. It's looked mediocre at best, but on the comps that the LA Gladiators seem to be playing, and the heroes that they seem to be picking up, it does look feasible that there will be an Atlanta Gladiators final unless something significant is brought up from the Seoul Dynasty or the Chengdu Hunters.
Yep. I think we are both pretty much on the same page regarding the Countdown Cup. Uh, but yeah, still glad that we got to exchange some of these points. And yeah, I think it's been like a really wild season so far. We still have some action to go, but naturally we are just about to round things off within the next like month and a half. So like I think just really want to see like a better version of the Overwatch League next season, and we will talk more about that in the off season for season 4. But thanks to everyone who's been listening to our podcast so far. We really appreciate it. Hope you keep those likes, comments, shares coming. And yeah, do join our Discord server in case you want to discuss stuff about the Overwatch League or play some fantasy leagues with us. We do a lot of that as well. And yeah, been a wild ride so far. Anything you want to say, Nightwing, before we round off this episode?
I think it's just going to be really fun to see a tournament without Dallas or Shanghai. And honestly, I'm hoping that Gladiators get knocked out early so that Shock can stay in that top three playoffs bye spot. But that's just my fanboyism. I think it's going to be a fun tournament to watch, and definitely keep your eyes out for all the matches.
Yep, definitely. There's just like 6 games in these playoffs because, double elimination bracket with just 4 teams. But usually all those 6 games are pretty interesting to watch. And fortunately for us, they are somewhere like during the morning, so we can catch them before we get started for the day. Uh, and don't have to stay up late at night, which is something I don't do very often. So yeah, there's some like like a really fun element to watching these games for us at least. And yeah, anything more to add, Nightwing?
I think that about wraps it up.
All right, then thanks a lot again, guys, for listening. Do remember to do all the stuff that helps the YouTube algorithm suggest our videos to other people, like, comment, share, subscribe, turn on the notifications with the bell icon, join our Discord server, and we will see you next week after the Countdown Cup. Have a good one, guys. Bye bye.